Mongolia is an inhospitable treasure trove. It holds the dusty, fossilized mysteries of ancient worlds. Though not one of the first regions outside of Africa to host early human ancestors, the area has undergone so many dramatic environmental changes that it is no wonder it has so many stories to tell. Its paleontological resources seem endless, with more research always uncovering new finds. As we journey to these dry wastelands, we come face to face with a mystery millions of years old, patiently waiting to be revealed by our species. A mystery that has yet to be totally one that takes us back to the Cretaceous period and the swampy habitat of one of the weirdest theropod dinosaurs, Dinocheirus mirificus, the unusually terrible hand. For nearly a century, scientists have been trekking out to the dunes and rocks of the Mongolian Gobi Desert, long before the dagger of European imperialism was driven into this region. The endemic fossils of parrot-beaked dinosaurs emerged from the surrounding rock due to the natural processes of erosion. It is a commonly held belief that the rugged skulls of these animals played a part in the myths of indigenous peoples and weary travelers alike. According to these ideas, the skulls were considered to be those of large bird-like predators with regal affinity and a taste for gold, the proud and mighty griffin. Regardless of the truth behind these claims, the unflinching hammer and pick of nature have excavated the fossil remains of ancient beasts for millennia. It's thanks to nature's help that we can even find these traces of ancient life. But this same process also leads to the snail-paced destruction of fossils as wind, sand, water, and plants chip them down to dust. The first official Western expedition to the parched vistas and sandstone cliffs was launched by the American Museum of Natural History of New York in the 1920s, led by paleontologist and adventurer Roy Chapman Andrews, the physical embodiment of Victorian-era pluck. The expedition was incredibly fruitful, uncovering the remains of dinosaurs that died 80 million years ago. Strapped to the backs of begrudging camels and inadequate dodge vehicles, their finds included the skeletons of the small ceratopsian dinosaurs, Protoceratops, and Psittacosaurus, as well as the small but feisty Velociraptor, the hauntingly beautiful Oviraptor, and enough eggs to make hundreds of omelets. Had they not been made of hard, inedible minerals? Andrew's team were not the first and would never be the last. The human story continued. 20 years after the first expedition, another series of journeys into the wastes would be undertaken by Soviets from the U.S. Academy of Sciences and Mongolians from the Committee of Scientific Affairs of the Mongolian People's Republic. Unfortunately for them, World War II broke out and put a stop to their plans. After the war, 3 expeditions were successfully undertaken in 1946, 1948, and 1949. The Soviet scientists surveyed the areas found by the American venture in the 1920s, as well as noted some new localities in the Nimekt Basin in southern Mongolia. This depression would become known for the breadth of organisms discovered, running the gamut from the simplest decomposers and plants to the largest dinosaurs and tertiary consumers. The Soviets teamed up with the Chinese for more expeditions in 1959 and 1960. This set of expeditions covered the same ground as the last few but recovered new taxa from Cretaceous and Tertiary-aged layers of the Earth. Natural history treasures are numerous in the Gobi. Despite the collections of Americans, Soviets, and Chinese, more remnants of lost worlds were forthcoming. A third set of expeditions, this time undertaken by the Polish and Mongolians in 1963, 1964, and 1965, would bring back to their museums a set of fossils so bizarre their mystery would remain unsolved for over 60 years. Back in the 1960s, the Mongolian expeditions were composed mostly of men, but among the ranks of the second expedition of 1964 were 2 women, and the 1965 expedition had 3. The 1965 expedition was led by Polish paleontologist Zofia. Sophia's expertise was in Paleozoic invertebrates, especially the trilobites. Eventually, she switched her focus to Mesozoic mammals, and she never lost her love of the sciences, noted for an extreme tenacity for excavation, research, and preparation. One anecdote tells of a summer expedition in the Gobi, the same one where the best fossil ever found of a Protoceratops and Velociraptor in a death battle was unearthed. During this trip, she ruptured her eardrum, went back to Warsaw for surgery, and as soon as she was healed, she went right back to the field. It was on the 1965 Soviet-Mongolian expedition led by Zo that she found a disturbingly large pair of arms, belonging to a creature that surely haunted the nightmares of the hooting duckbill dinosaurs and the speedy ostrich-like dinosaurs of the Cretaceous Namek Basin. A pair of terrible hands leading to a pair of extraordinarily strong arms and shoulders were excavated from the top of a hill made of sandstone which crumbled between the scientists' fingers. The remains came from a section of rock which had been designated the Namek Formation by past explorers. This formation of rock represents a span of millions of years from the Late Cretaceous. Unfortunately, it's been incredibly difficult to date the Namek Formation. Radiometric dating is hard for this unit due to its composition and geometry. Plus, it seems as though it transitioned into and overlapped both physically and temporally with other geological formations in the region like the Barun Goyo and Jadachta formations. That said, different dating methods have been used by various researchers throughout the years to narrow in on better possible dates. Jadwiga Kursevska and Maria Zimbaskatwa-Zidwa published a paper in 1983, using the fossils of green algae to get an Upper Cretaceous age for the unit. A 2023 paper used uranium-lead isotope and Y-screening analysis on the apatite minerals found in Tarbosaurus teeth to get a better idea of when they were laid down and started fossilizing. This analysis got a date of 66.7 plus or minus 21.5 million years for the upper part of the Namek Formation. Overall, many of the different techniques generally agree with the Late Cretaceous age attributed to the rock unit from the presence of specific animal types alone. It's generally agreed upon to be the Maastrichtian age of the Late Cretaceous, but this is far from definitive, and more research may adjust the timeline. The fossil Zofia and her team uncovered from the sandstone over a period of 4 days included massive forearms, a complete shoulder girdle, 3 dorsal vertebrae, 5 ribs, and gastralia, belly ribs. The original paper describing the find, authored by Hoshka and Ueronievich, considered the remains to belong to a creature of unimaginable ferocity, a flesh-eating powerhouse of a predator that would frighten even the pluckest of arrogant tyrannosaurs, since the only bits and pieces they found were hands and arms. And since those hands were enough to make you make bricks, they named it quite appropriately the Magnificently Terrible Hand, which in Latin would be Dinocheirus, the image of a haunting predator without a face, without a body, no legs to hold its bulk, and no tail to maim enemies, would haunt the annals of Polish and Mongolian sciences for decades to come. Despite plenty of hypotheses for the appearance of the terrible hand, no one was able to definitively prove what the beast could be until more remains were extracted from the same sun-scorched lands of the Gobi Desert. The original paper considered the creature to be part of the group Carnosauria. During this period in dinosaur science, the group Carnosauria was lumped into the larger group Meat. The members of the Carnosauria club included nearly all forms of Mesozoic monsters: the dauntingly swift allosaurs, the hasty ornithom, the OG megalosaurs, and of course, the tenacious tyrannosaurs of the American West. Basically, anything with big teeth, big heads, and scary claws were assumed to be card-carrying members of the Carnosaur Club. Deinocheirus was given one of these membership cards because of its large size and the thick-walled characteristics of its bones, being heavier and less hollow than other types of theropod dinosaurs. In 1971, American paleontologist John Oss, one of the first to vocally observe the connections between birds and dinosaurs and a progenitor of the dinosaur renaissance, observed how the bones of Deinocheirus had similarities with ornith. Nothing more specific was determined, but it would turn out that Ostrom was right on the mark. Between 2006 and 2012, an overwhelming amount of evidence was uncovered that not only completely solved the 60-year mystery but solved it in a most unexpected and frankly bizarre way no one could have imagined. A new team of researchers set out to find the original dig site of the Deinocheirus fossils in and around 2008. The team consisted of a joint venture of Korean and Mongolian scientists. They were rewarded with success in finding the original site and were correct in their hunch that the old site held more clues to the mystery. 2012 saw the publication of this discovery by Yuan-Nim Lee, Phil Bell, and Phil Curry. It became immediately clear as to why the remains of the terrible hand were in such a shattered fashion. The researchers found the feeding traces of an incredible predator of the region. A Tarbosaurus had scraped its teeth along the gastralia, which lined the bottom of the stomach of the terrible hand. Despite the happenstance of rediscovering the original Dinocheirus dig site and finding more skeletal elements, the creature remained a relative mystery for a few more years. Mongolia has some of the richest fossil resources of any one region on Earth, which has helped to fuel a fossil black market in the area. Fossil poachers will make discoveries, but take only the most easily sellable parts of the animals they have found, like skulls, feet, and hands, leaving the rest of the skeletons vandalized and open to the elements, making the process of erosion all the easier. Sometimes they will even destroy the rest of the skeleton and dig site, so that no one else can collect and make money off their discovery. I wouldn't be surprised if this is sometimes done to hide their activities from the authorities as well. Back in 2009, during the trip to rediscover the first Dinocheirus site, the same Korean-Mongolian Team Plus, Phil Curry was able to locate a new specimen of Dinocheirus, thanks to a bunch of notes that had been scribbled on some literally dirty Mongolian currency by fossil poachers. This string of clues led the team to a locality called Bujiansov, which had a whole Deinocheirus skeleton, minus the aforementioned head, feet, and hands. Thankfully, an arm was still with the remaining specimen, which clued the team in on the identity of the new specimen as This confirmation also told the scientists that yet another Deinocheirus specimen had been known since 2006, but had been labeled as As luck would have it, in 2011, French fossil trader Francois spotted a set of fossils, including a head, hands, and feet, of a weird dinosaur in the private possession of a German fossil collector. Brought word of this to Belgian paleontologist Pascal Godefroy, who was well aware of what Phil Curry and friends were searching for. So Godefroy got Curry in on this case, bought the fossils, donated them to the Royal Belgian Institute of Natural Sciences, and the group of paleontologists all came together to officially confirm that what they had on their hands was not only new Deinocheirus material, but were technically the exact missing elements from the specimens they already had. In the end, the remains were all repatriated to Mongolia, where they belong, to the Central Museum of Mongolian Dinosaurs for further study. The mystery of Deinocheirus, an enigma spanning over 60 years, was finally solved. And boy, is it unlike anything anyone could have ever imagined. Now replete with 3 specimens of the terrible hand, 1 fractured and 2 complete, scientists went to work trying to tell the story of the Frankensteinian creature, to resurrect the terrible hand, and to tease out answers to its life history and connections with the world in which it lived. We must do as the discoverers did, and take a gander at the bones. Isn't that a truly bizarre skeleton? It almost looks like a chimera of different dinosaurs. The 2014 paper estimated that the largest of the 2 specimens may have been as much as 36 feet in length and weighed up to 7 tons when it was alive. The terrible hand still holds the world record for the largest arms of any terrestrial biped to ever live. With lengths pushing 8 feet, these powerful forelimbs ended in gracile but powerful fingers and enormous recurved talons. Its body was adapted to hold an estimated 6-ton bulk, which can be seen in the broad, thickened legs and feet that resemble the powerful legs of a carnivorous theropod. The neck is long and topped by a skull with mixed features from various dinosaurian groups. Its head is long and low, flattened from the top and bottom like the wide, pulp-munching beaks of the hadrosaurs, except this skull lacked teeth. In 2014, researchers CT scanned the skull of Deinocheirus to learn about its brain. They found that the brain was similar in shape to birds and the smartest known non-bird dinosaurs. It was large and globular, but proportionally quite small compared to the massive size of the noggin and the creature it controlled. The ribs bent upwards and then straight down and inwards, giving the animal a tall or deep look but without a lot of width. The highly pneumatic vertebrae held up neural spines, not unlike the rectangular blades of bone you find among the forgotten remains of a beached whale. The wide struts of the spine gave the terrible hand a hump-shaped sail. If we continue our journey down the stony vertebral column, you'll find it had a long tail tipped by a short series of fused bones, similar to a bird's pedal. This structure anchors the tail feathers used most commonly for changing direction in flight or for display. The evidence of a pygostyle in the terrible hand suggests that it, too, may have had a large fan of feathers at the end of the tail for display purposes. Being both an ornithomizore and a maniraptoran, Dinocheirus may have been covered in a coat of feathers. While the world was hot during the Mesozoic, and feathers might hinder a large, warm-blooded animal, a shorter coat seems right on the mark. The beak of the animal suggests it would have been an herbivore. The preservation of over 1,400 polished grinding stones, called gastroliths, in the chest cavity of one of the more complete specimens speaks volumes of this conclusion. Deinocheirus would have used these gastroliths to grind up food that could not be broken down by its mouth. Similar to the therizinosaurs, it likely used its long arms and claws to reach up into trees to pull down anything it wanted to its waiting mouth. The thickness of the lower jaw leaves more than enough room for a giant tongue, which could have grasped foliage. The flat, blunt claws of the feet would have been used to keep the animal in place as it foraged. The relatively shallow spaces in the skull reserved for jaw muscles meant it probably didn't have a super strong bite force, which strongly points to a lifestyle more akin to modern waterfowl. Instead of reaching up into the branches of magnolias and conifers, it may have used its reinforced legs and blunt foot claws to anchor itself deeply into the sand and mud of riverbanks and swamps. A hint at what else the beast may have eaten lies within the gastroliths in its chest cavity. Fish bones and scales. The terrible hand was snacking on fish before it died. If it was wading through rivers and mashing up soft water plants, fish were definitely also on the menu. An omnivore, it was. As the sun rises with a screaming cacophony of yellow and orange rays, a beast wakes from her slumber. As the lumbering omnivore rises from the wooden leaf mat she made for herself the night before, dust from the creatures of the night evacuates her hide in a cloud of obnoxious feathers, smelly, dead skin, and acrid animal droppings. This morning she was awoken by the loud honking and shrieking emanating from the congregation of her species on the riverbank. The wet season has swollen the waterways, choking them with bounties of fish and churned up vegetation. As she slowly makes her way to the river for breakfast, her joints creaking, she notices other animals in her Mongolian community are stirring. It is 7 o'clock, and everyone is waking up to begin the day. Deinocheirus was found within a fruitful unit of rock known as the Dinocheirus Formation. During the time of the terrible hand, the Dinocheirus Basin was not a wasteland of dunes, sand, and rocky out. The flaming cliffs did not yet exist. Mountain ranges had not yet been crunched up by the movements of the continents, and camels were many millions of years from wandering the premises. At the time of Deinocheirus, this region was a mixture of different habitats. Evidence in the rock record suggests it was rather lush and vibrant. The Dinocheirus Formation is rife with theropod dinosaurs, while the remains of other types of animals are relatively scant. This lack of diversity in non-theropod species may indicate why there were groups of animals taking any open niche available, like hunting down the terrible hand were the likes of the Tyrannosaurs, Alioramus, and Tarbosaurus, for which direct evidence of feeding behavior of the latter exists in the remains of the terrible hand. Tarbosaurus was a 10-meter, 5-ton cousin to Tyrannosaurus rex, and would have offered Dinocheirus pretty much the only major threat at the time. Thanks to the incredibly long-running mystery of this dinosaur genus, you get 3 or 4 generalized versions of the animal. The original look for the critter was the giant carnosaur, essentially a megaraptoran before anyone knew what a megaraptoran was. This version didn't stay in the literature for long, but it totally captured the imaginations of paleoartists for way too long. Recall that even in the original paper that described Dinocheirus, the possible identity of ornithomizore was floated, as this identification solidified as the more probable one. Paleoart started to force Dinocheirus out of the carnosaur box and into the ostrich mimic box, since most ornithomizores known from the 80s to the 90s were generally very similar in appearance. People were treated to a parade of giant ostrich-like The next form of Dinocheirus came when rumors of the discovery of new specimens were spread throughout the various paleontological conferences and online spaces in the early 2010s. At the time, things were vague, so a bunch of art was created that showed essentially the same giant ornithomizore as earlier decades, this time with a hump or sail over the hips. Once everything was officially published, the lovable, bear-like, spoon-billed creature was confirmed, though the terrible hand was excavated nearly 60 years ago. Its remains have tantalized and taunted any researcher who has learned of the story. What was once assumed to be a common killer among the bustling Triceratops and Tarbosaurus took on a life of its own and underwent a facelift as yet unheard of among the dinosaurs. Deinocheirus was one of the most interesting theropod dinosaurs, a spoon-faced, sloth-armed, camel-humped behemoth with a taste for fish
and a mouth for moss.
It was the largest form an ostrich dinosaur could take and met its end by the teeth of a tyrannosaur, a life lived and a life lost. But the remains went on to compose the bodies and energies of countless other life forms. What other bizarre mysteries lie hidden among the sands of the Gobi Desert? For more interesting stories about nature, the history of life, or what goes bump in the night, subscribe, like this video, drop a comment in the comment section below, and hit the bell icon to stay in the know with everything Ancient Earth X. Thanks for watching!